Let's hear the viewpoint of the SABC, South Africa's national broadcast channel, on the incident that happened at the Synagogue Church of All Nations on September 12, 2014. More viewpoints from the international media will follow.
This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name is Evan Jansen. This show is always live. Now, this week, the International Journal of Scientific Engineering and Research questioned the verdict of a Lagos State Coroner's Court ruling in an edition titled "The Elimination of Structural Failure and the Placement of Chemical Explosives Weapons expert Paul Iguniwe says the collapse was caused by an infrasonic weapon. Iguniwe, who is a lecturer at the Kaduna Polytechnic College of Science and Technology, argued that the only viable scientific option to explain the unique nature of the controversial collapse was an infrasonic weapon. Now, Paul Iguniwe joins us from Benin City, south of Nigeria, via Skype to quickly give us his views. A very good morning to you, Paul. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Just tell us the evidence that made you come to the conclusion that you did. What was that?
Basically, why I came to that conclusion was the fact that when I looked at the whole scenario, there are certain signatures we look out for once there's an explosion, and those signatures were not found at the site of the collapsed building. The government's position has been that the building was as a result of poor engineering development. And that also, when we looked at it critically, we discovered that the way the building came down is not consistent with a structure that is as a result of poor materials. And on inspection of the foundations, we discovered that the foundation was as if it snapped off. There was no crack, there was no stress. And then, consequently, Lagos State Materials Laboratory testing results showed to a high level that the material structure and the materials used in the construction were in order. So it generated a lot of controversial, sentimental positions here in Nigeria. And I've been a scientist with interest in such occurrences. I took a personal interest and I looked at the video site. And that led to my conclusion. Wait a minute, there was this uncertified flying aircraft that flew over the building severally and then flew for the last time. After 30 minutes, the building came down. And after extensive research, I came to that conclusion. Possibly, and I believe that that's what happened, that plane was carrying an infrasonic weapon of an infrasonic generator and fired repeatedly over the building. And once the building at the atomic level absorbs such energy, resonance takes place, which at a very high energy can cause such a uniform crumbling collapse. It's very important that we understand how the building came down. That's what led to the strong evidence I gave at the coroner's court. And I decided to go further by testing my principles in an international journal, away from Africa, outside Africa. And to my delight, it was accepted and it was published.
But Paul, I want to ask you, you're a man of science, a man who deals with evidence and international benchmarks, as you just mentioned. I want to ask you, in this case, what international benchmarks did you look at for the use of this weapon when you did your research? I'm asking specifically, do you have any video or photographic evidence of an infrasonic weapon being used anywhere else in the world in your research to prove that this could be possible?
Okay. When I did my research, apart from the fact that the Americans, the Russians are deeply into infrasonic weapon research, the closest we have is that of a Russian parabola sonic weapon, which you can find on net. Don't forget, it's not a weapon that anybody can just lay hand on it. But so far, the one we have is on the internet. You can find it in one of my citations, where you see a parabolic antenna, which has the capability of firing sonic pulse, which is a form of an infrasonic weapon. And as we may know, what comes to the limelight, or what comes to the knowledge of the people via the news media, is almost nothing, almost incomparable to the things that we don't know about. A lot of research are going on. Currently, they are doing smart weapons, drones that can target individuals with miniature weapons. You don't see that on the news, but it's been done. We know from body language of these nations and the tests they're carrying out. So based on that, I personally have not handled an infrasonic weapon. A few people do, few nations even have access to it. But it has been used, different forms of this energy has been used in the past. It has been used in crowd control in Ireland. The French has also used it as an anti-riot control weapon. And then the Russians have tested a variation of that. And the Americans are also deeply funding such research. So based on that has happened in the last, the Americans took a strong position in 1997. So from then till now, a lot of research are going on, and we do not know how deep, if you read my submission, you do not know how deep this research has gone to. So for me, I believe that it exists there, and it's clandestine, and therefore it's not in the public domain.
I thank you for joining us. That is the man who wrote this report here in South Africa, Bali Chwene and Kirsten Nematendani are with us this morning. They with architect, man with more than 50 years experience, Derek Garvey. They're here in the studio with me this morning to talk about the latest scientific research into this. Mr. Nematendani, if I can start with you, just give us your overview with how you view the latest information, as it were.
Good morning to you, and thank you for the opportunity. Let me say I was privileged to have been out there at the synagogue and saw the collapsed building. And fortunate enough, at the time we had Dr. Ntonga, an engineer from Tanzania, who took us through the structure itself, in particular the foundation. I personally saw how intact that foundation was, nothing that shows any cracks, showing that the structural failure issue should be ruled out. And I must say it was a privilege to have been there with the families that were affected. And all of us came to a conclusion that it would appear the reasons given by the coroner on the structural failure does not really qualify for the building. In particular, comparing it with various or previous structural failures, because the way the building came down in few seconds, and of course the dust smoke fits exactly. I think we saw about 10 to 11 examples of such, and that's why we feel this seemed to be the solution.
Let me just correct two very important aspects that you missed there. Firstly, Paul is not a Nigerian scientist. He's a scientist by himself. The article that he published is in the International Engineering, Science and Technology. That's the first thing. Secondly, what he's saying is that not the Americans or the Russians caused the building to collapse. That technology has been used by these particular two countries.
Mr. Garvey, you've got more than 50 years experience. Just tell us, how do you view, firstly, the collapse itself, and then what has followed after?
Thank you very much. There's no question in my mind that it was a controlled demolition. You know, there are different ways to take down a building of that size. 51 years ago in Durban, they used to do it with a hammer and then sell all the things they extracted from the building. This was an implosion that was controlled, as was done with me in Durban 50 years ago. So there's no doubt about that. When the building falls in on itself in a cloud of dust, it cannot be anything else. It was an imploded, controlled demolition. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
Mr. Nematendani, we have to look at where else, of course, in the world this kind of thing has happened, and which organizations would have this kind of advanced science that you guys mentioned and that is looked at in this report. Have you found any evidence of that around the world, either video or photographic for that matter?
Look, I think what we have as concrete is the fact that any controlled demolition will bring a structure down symmetrically in few seconds, and there will always be the dust smoke that you see, and it's similar. It looks like ashes, and that fits that description. Of course, the researcher would give us more evidence on, and as you can see, the research article is actually approved by international board members, and the editorial board members come from the US, Russia, and all the major countries. Those are people who spend their time in labs, and they have evidence, and what more can you look for if your experts come up and say, indeed, we agree with the facts. That's what we have.
Mr. Nematandani, you have the floor to speak to South Africa and the rest of Africa on this channel to give us your final views on this matter and how yourself and TB Joshua would like to close the book on what was a very dark day for South Africa.
Once again, we'd like to say to the viewers out there, we've been very clear from the onset that at some stage the truth will come out. And this is a process towards the truth that we've been talking about.
I thank you for coming and being so frank with us today, and to putting it forward to us. That is Mr. Bali Chwene, who sits in the middle, and Mr. Kirsten Nematandani. With them is Mr. Derek Garvey, who's an architect with more than 50 years experience here in South Africa.